I'm Doug, 28 years old, and a financial advisor who's done pretty well for himself. Tonight was supposed to be our typical monthly family dinner, but the tension at this fancy restaurant was different. Despite managing millions, my parents have always seen me as a financial disappointment. The expensive wine had just arrived when my father's face reddened. "Listen, Doug," he snapped, "we're not your bank anymore." Little did they know what was about to happen. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button, and stick around to see how I finally stood up for myself. Growing up in an affluent suburb just outside Boston, my childhood looked picture perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial home with its manicured lawn projected exactly the image my parents wanted: success, stability, and status. My father Richard built his reputation as one of the most sought-after orthopedic surgeons in Massachusetts. My mother Eleanor commanded respect as a corporate attorney who specialized in mergers and acquisitions. Together they were the power couple of Brookline, respected, admired, and intimidating as hell. From my earliest memories, the expectations were crystal clear. Excellence wasn't celebrated. It was the minimum requirement. B-plus grades weren't achievements. They were disappointments that prompted concerned conversations about my focus. Their vision for my future never included asking what I wanted. It was always assumed I would follow either my father into medicine or my mother into law. The Mitchell name means something in this town, my father would remind me regularly, usually while reviewing my report card, with a frown that suggested I was somehow tarnishing that legacy. By 13, I discovered my passion for numbers and finance after my uncle gave me a book about investing. I started tracking stocks for fun, creating mock portfolios and reading financial news instead of sports pages. When I showed my father my mock investment returns, 43% over 6 months, his response was a dismissive chuckle. "That's cute, Doug, but real investing isn't a game. Focus on your biology if you want to get into a good pre-med program." High school became an exercise in dual lives. Publicly, I took all the advanced science courses to please my parents. Privately, I devoured books on financial theory, market analysis, and investment strategies. My guidance counselor noticed my aptitude and suggested I explore economics or finance majors. When I mentioned this at dinner, my mother nearly choked on her wine. "A finance major? That's for students who can't handle real academic rigor," she said, exchanging knowing glances with my father. "Besides, investment bankers are just glorified salespeople." Still, I maintained perfect grades and got accepted to my father's alma mater, Harvard. The assumption was pre-med, and initially I complied. Those first 2 semesters were miserable. Organic chemistry felt like a foreign language, and while I could memorize what I needed to pass, I lacked the genuine interest that my classmates had. Meanwhile, in my one elective economics course, I was thriving, often explaining concepts to other students who struggled. The breaking point came during sophomore year when I received a C in advanced biochemistry despite studying harder than I ever had. The same semester, my investment analysis professor asked if I'd considered applying for the department's competitive internship program. Something had to give. The day I told my parents I was switching my major to finance was the first time I saw real disappointment in their eyes. Not the usual performative disappointment they displayed when I failed to meet arbitrary standards, but genuine dismay. "You're throwing away a meaningful career to play with other people's money," my father said coldly. "We've invested so much in preparing you for medicine," my mother added, as though my education was a stock that had suddenly plummeted in value. Despite their reaction changing, my major felt like breathing freely for the first time. My GPA jumped to a perfect 4.0. I secured competitive internships that my classmates coveted. I graduated summa cum laude with job offers from several prestigious firms. At graduation, while other parents beamed with pride, mine offered measured congratulations that felt more like condolences. "Well, I suppose you can always apply to medical school later when you realize what you've given up," my father said, patting my shoulder at our graduation lunch. The pattern continued through my early career. No achievement was quite good enough. My first promotion was just luck. My bonus was probably standard for everyone. Each accomplishment was minimized, each milestone diminished. And so, Our monthly family dinners became a strange ritual of subtle undermining. My mother would ask leading questions about my friends from college who had pursued noble careers in medicine. My father would mention the children of colleagues who were making a real difference. My sister Jessica, 5 years older, and a hospital administrator recognized the dynamic, but could only offer sympathetic glances across the table. I learned to weather these dinners with a practiced smile, knowing something they didn't. I was succeeding beyond their wildest imagination. I just wasn't ready to show my cards, not until they forced my hand. My first job out of college wasn't particularly impressive. A junior analyst position at Cumberland Investments, a boutique firm that managed pension funds and moderate wealth individuals. The starting salary was decent, but certainly not extraordinary, $65,000 a year. I took a small apartment in Cambridge, drove a used Honda, and lived well within my means. This modest lifestyle wasn't just about saving money, it was about flying under my parents' radar. "At least it's a foot in the door," my father commented when I told them about the job, his tone suggesting I'd settled for mediocrity. What my parents didn't understand was that I had chosen Cumberland specifically because of their unique position in the market. Unlike the massive Wall Street firms where innovation was stifled by bureaucracy, Cumberland was small enough that good ideas could be heard yet established enough to have real capital behind them. During my first 6 months, I observed, learned, and developed a theory about undervalued mid-market companies in the renewable energy sector. When I finally presented my analysis to the investment committee, the reception was lukewarm at best. "It's too speculative," said one senior manager. "The time frame for returns is too long," said another. "Interesting academic exercise, Doug, but not practical for our clients," concluded the head of investments. Rather than argue, I thanked them for their feedback and decided to put my theory to the test with my own money. I had saved nearly $20,000 from my signing bonus and frugal living. Instead of using it for a down payment on a condo as my parents had suggested, I created a personal investment portfolio focused entirely on my renewable energy thesis. Working nights and weekends, I researched companies that others had overlooked, developed valuation models that accounted for future regulatory changes, and made calculated bets on technologies that showed promise despite their current market position. 6 months later, my personal portfolio had grown by 62%, while the market had only moved up 7%. I refined my strategy, reinvested the gains, and expanded my research. During this time, I met Marcus Whitfield, a 50-something senior vice president who had built his reputation on contrarian investments that paid off spectacularly. One evening, while I was working late, he stopped by my cubicle and noticed the analysis on my screen. "That's not one of our client portfolios," he observed. I admitted it was my personal project, and to my surprise, he pulled up a chair and asked me to walk him through my thinking. For 2 hours, we discussed my strategy, my research methods, and my results. By the end of the conversation, he was nodding thoughtfully. "You're onto something here, Mitchell. Most of these old-timers are too stuck in traditional energy and big tech to see what's coming. Keep this quiet, keep building your case, and come see me in 3 months." Marcus became my mentor, providing guidance while allowing me to develop my own approach. When I returned to him with even stronger results, he introduced me to 3 wealthy clients who were willing to allocate small portions of their portfolios to my strategy. "Consider this your audition," he told me. The audition turned into a spectacular success. Within 18 months, I had generated returns of over 100% for these test portfolios, while maintaining surprisingly low volatility. Word spread among Cumberland's wealthy clients, and soon I was managing a $50 million fund using my strategy. My official title remained modest, but my compensation structure changed dramatically as Marcus helped me negotiate a percentage of the profits I generated. My annual income jumped to the mid-6 figures, but I maintained my modest lifestyle and kept this success hidden from my family. "How's the entry-level job?" my mother would ask at our monthly dinners. "It's going well. Learning a lot," I would reply, changing the subject. Meanwhile, I launched a side business as North Star Advisors, a private investment vehicle for ultra-high net worth individuals who wanted access to my strategy. With Marcus's blessing and contacts, I built a select client base of fewer than 20 investors, each placing at least $1 million under my management. The breakthrough came when one of my renewable energy pick Solaris Technologies received a buyout offer at 4 times its market value. My clients made fortunes and my personal investment, which I had continued to build, crossed into the 7-figure range. By 26, I was managing over $200 million and had a personal net worth that would have shocked my parents. Yet I continued living in my modest apartment and driving my 5-year-old Honda. The few luxury items I allowed myself, and expensive watch-tailored suits for client meetings, could be explained away as professional necessities. Strangely, during this time, my parents began offering me small loans and financial help. They assumed that since I hadn't followed their prescribed path to success, I must be struggling. "We noticed you're still in that starter apartment," my mother mentioned during one dinner. "We could help with a down payment if you're having trouble saving." Rather than correct their misconception, I occasionally accepted these small offers. A $5,000 loan for a supposed car repair, a generous gift to help with my fictional student loan payments. Each dollar they gave me was carefully invested and grew exponentially, held in a separate account I mentally labeled Parents' Return Fund. I knew this charade couldn't last forever. My firm was gaining recognition in investment circles. I had been featured in industry publications. It was only a matter of time before my two worlds collided. Still, I wasn't prepared for how spectacularly that collision would occur. The week before the fateful dinner began with a major milestone. The private equity fund I had built around emerging battery technology companies was acquired by a larger investment group. The deal, worth over $30 million for my ownership stake alone, meant I never had to work another day in my life if I chose not to. Of course, I had no intention of stopping. I loved what I did, but the financial security was undeniable. The morning after the deal closed, as I sat in my office reviewing the final paperwork, my phone lit up with a text from my sister Jessica. "Fair warning, Mom and Dad are on a tear about something. They want family dinner at Morton's this Friday instead of the usual place. Prepare yourself." Morton's was a high-end steakhouse where my father only took clients he wanted to impress or family members he wanted to lecture, in a setting where they couldn't make a scene. This was not a good sign. "Any idea what's going on?" I texted back. "Not sure, but they've been huddling and whispering all week. Mom asked if I knew anything about your financial situation." I played dumb. Jessica was the only family member who had an inkling of my true circumstances. While I hadn't revealed specifics, she had picked up enough clues over the years to suspect I was doing far better than our parents assumed. Her husband Ryan worked in commercial real estate and had once mentioned my name being associated with a major property acquisition. I had sworn them both to secrecy. Friday evening arrived with an unusual knot in my stomach. I parked my Honda, which I now kept mainly for family appearances, a block from Morton's, and walked the rest of the way, using the time to center myself. Through the window, I could see my parents already seated at a corner table, my father checking his watch with theatrical impatience, though I was 5 minutes early. "There he is," my mother said with a tight smile as I approached. She offered her cheek for the obligatory kiss. My father stood for a brief formal handshake. "Traffic?" he asked, implying I was late when we all knew I wasn't. "Not bad," I replied, taking my seat. "This is a change of venue, special occasion." They exchanged glances that set off immediate alarm bells in my mind. "We just thought it would be nice," my mother said, her voice carrying that artificial brightness that always preceded difficult conversations. The waiter appeared and my father ordered a bottle of Camus Special Selection Cabernet, a $300 wine he knew I would recognize as extravagant. Another warning sign: when my father spent conspicuously on wine, he was usually establishing dominance before making a point. "How's work?" he asked, as the waiter departed, his tone suggesting he was inquiring about a hobby rather than a career. "Busy. Good." I had learned years ago that brief positive answers gave them less ammunition. Still at that same firm, Cumberland was it? My mother knew perfectly well where I worked. She was setting up something. "Yes, still there." 6 years now. "Isn't it, Richard? Didn't your colleague's son make partner at Goldman Sachs after just 5 years? And there it was, the familiar pattern of comparing me unfavorably to some acquaintance's child whose accomplishments were probably exaggerated for parental bragging rights. Different firm, Different track, I said mildly, taking a breadstick. My father launched into a story about his golf partner's daughter, who had just purchased a penthouse apartment in Back Bay, the subtext clearly being, while you're still renting that modest place. I nodded politely, letting the implied criticism wash over me like background noise. The waiter returned with the wine, and my father made a show of tasting and approving it. As glasses were poured, I saw Jessica and Ryan enter the restaurant. Jessica's expression was a mixture of apology and warning as they approached. "Sorry we're late," she said, though they were exactly on time. Ryan had a client call that ran long. More greetings, more cheek kisses. Ryan gave me a subtle nod of solidarity as they sat down. He had endured enough of these dinners to understand the dynamic. "We were just catching up with Doug about work," my mother said. "Jessica, did you tell them your news?" Jessica looked momentarily confused. "What news?" "About the hospital's expansion project. Your promotion to oversee it." "Oh, that's not official yet, Mom." "Well, I ran into Barbara Wilson at the charity luncheon, and she said it was a done deal. You should speak up more, dear. You deserve recognition." My mother had never once encouraged me to speak up more about my accomplishments. The double standard was so familiar, it had become almost comical. As appetizers were ordered, my father steered the conversation toward my cousin Brad's new position at a prestigious Boston law firm. The subtext was clear. Family members who had chosen proper careers were thriving while I was presumably stagnating. "How about you, Doug? Any exciting developments?" Ryan asked, trying to give me an opening to share something positive. "Actually, I'm planning a vacation next month. Thinking about Japan." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. My parents exchanged another of their looks. "Japan. That's quite expensive, isn't it?" my mother asked, her tone suggesting concern while her eyes conveyed skepticism. "I've been saving," I said simply. My father scoffed, an actual scoff like a character in a bad movie. "Saving on that analyst's salary while living in Boston, that must require quite the budgeting skills." "I manage." I took a deliberate sip of the overpriced wine. "Maybe you should focus on paying back some of those loans before taking exotic vacations," my mother suggested, her voice honey-sweet, but her words barbed. Jessica shot me an alarmed look. Ryan suddenly became very interested in the menu. The trap was being sprung. "Loans?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "Don't play dumb, Doug," my father said, leaning forward slightly. "We've been keeping track. 5,000 for the car repairs last year, 3,000 for that work certification program, the 2,000 for the apartment security deposit when you moved. It adds up." I nodded slowly. "I've always intended to pay those back." "Really? Because it seems like you've been treating us like a personal ATM while planning vacations to Japan." The waiter chose that moment to approach for our main course orders. The timing was almost comedic. His cheerful, "Have we decided on entrees?" met with 5 tense faces. Somehow we all managed to order. When he departed, the table fell into uncomfortable silence. Jessica attempted to change the subject. "Did anyone watch that documentary I mentioned last week about the coral reefs?" Neither of my parents responded. My father was staring at me with the expression he probably used on medical students who had disappointed him. My mother was arranging her silverware with precise movements that betrayed her agitation. "Look, if you're concerned about the money, I can start paying it back right away," I offered, hoping to diffuse the situation. "It's not about the money, Doug," my mother said in a tone that made it clear it was absolutely about the money. "It's about responsibility. Priorities. We've helped you because that's what parents do, but we can't help but notice you don't seem to be making progress." "What kind of progress were you expecting?" "Career advancement. A proper home. Some indication that you're building something worthwhile instead of just treading water." The unfairness of it, the complete misreading of my life, was almost laughable. I had built something most people would consider remarkable. I had created more wealth in 6 years than most people see in a lifetime. Yet here I was being lectured about treading water. "I'm doing fine," I said, working to keep my voice level. "Fine isn't good enough for a Mitchell, my father," said the familiar refrain that had haunted my childhood. "We didn't raise you to be mediocre." The stakes arrived perfectly timed to witness what happened next. My father cut into his porterhouse with surgical precision the same hands that had performed countless operations now dismantling a 45-ounce steak. He chewed thoughtfully before continuing his assessment of my supposed failures. You know, Doug, when I was your age I had already bought our first house, was making a name for myself at Massachusetts General, and had started building my practice. Your mother was arguing cases that set legal precedents. What exactly have you accomplished that justifies expensive trips to Japan? I felt Jessica's foot gently tap mine under the table, a silent plea to stay calm. But 6 years of diminishment had created a pressure that was finally reaching its breaking point. I've accomplished quite a bit, actually, I said carefully. Entry-level financial analysis at a firm. Nobody's heard of my father challenged. Your potential is being wasted and you know it. Richard Jessica interjected. Doug's been very dedicated to his work. Maybe we could. Stay out of this, Jess, my father snapped. Your brother needs to hear some hard truths. My mother placed her hand on his arm, not to restrain him but in solidarity. We've been patient, Doug. We've supported you financially and emotionally through this phase. But at some point, you need to get serious about your future. I am serious about my future, I replied, cutting a piece of my own steak with deliberate care. Are you? Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you've been coasting, taking the easy route, and now planning vacations you can't afford while still owing your parents thousands of dollars. Ryan cleared his throat uncomfortably. The market's been strong lately. Maybe Doug's investments have done well. My father turned to him with an expression of patronizing amusement. Doug's investments. With what capital? The $65,000 a year before taxes that these firms pay. Analysts, after Boston rent and living expenses. It's actually $72,000 now, I said, deliberately understating my income by a factor of about 20. Oh, forgive me, my father said with mock deference. 72,000. That changes everything. The point is, my mother continued, we're concerned about your financial habits. The constant borrowing, the lack of progress, and now this extravagant vacation plan. I haven't asked you for money in months, I pointed out. Because we made it clear the bank was closing, my father said sharply. After that last emergency where you needed $3,000 for some certification program that doesn't seem to have advanced your career one bit. That certification program had actually been a private investment in a startup that had tripled in value, but they had no way of knowing that. I appreciate everything you've done for me. I said the words feeling hollow after years of their conditional support. Do you? Because appreciation usually comes with responsibility, with recognition of sacrifice. Jessica attempted intervention again. Dad, I'm sure Doug is grateful. Maybe this isn't the best. No, let's get it all out, he interrupted. I've been holding my tongue for too long. The restaurant had grown quieter, or perhaps I was just more aware of the other diners as my father's voice rose slightly. A couple at the next table glanced over, then quickly returned to their own meals. You had every advantage, my father continued. The best schools, our connections, our guidance, and what have you done with it? Taken the path of least resistance, settled for mediocrity, and treated us like an ATM in the process. I never meant to. Your intentions don't matter, Doug. Your actions do, and your actions show a pattern of dependence and underachievement that frankly embarrasses us. The word embarrasses hit like a physical blow. After everything I'd built, everything I'd accomplished, I was an embarrassment to them because I hadn't followed their prescribed path. My mother dabbed at her lips with her napkin. We've added it up, Doug. Over $20,000 in the past 3 years. That's not counting all the support during college and the help with your first apartment. If you're concerned about the money, I can write you a check tonight, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. It's not about the check, Doug. My father's voice rose enough that several nearby tables definitely turned to look. It's about the pattern. It's about what it represents. And what exactly does it represent, Dad? Failure to launch, dependency, poor financial management. He ticked off each point on his fingers like a diagnosis. At your age, a man should be self-sufficient, building something. not borrowing from his parents for basic expenses while planning frivolous vacations. The unfairness of it all, the complete misreading of who I was and what I had built, finally broke through my practiced composure. "You have no idea what I've built," I said quietly. "What was that?" my father demanded. I said, "You have no idea what I've built, what I've accomplished, because you've never once bothered to really ask or listen." My mother's expression hardened. "Don't take that tone, Doug. Your father and I have only ever wanted what's best for you." "No," I replied, setting down my fork with a soft clink. "You've wanted what's best for your image of me. There's a difference." My father's face flushed red. "Now listen here." "No, you listen," I interrupted, surprising even myself. "For years I've sat at these dinners and listened to you, diminish my choices, my career, my life. I've nodded and smiled while you compared me unfavorably to every doctor's son and lawyer's daughter in Boston. I'm done with that." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Jessica looked both shocked and oddly proud. Ryan was studying his plate with intense focus. My mother's lips had formed a thin line of disapproval. My father leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "We have supported you financially when you couldn't support yourself. We have given you opportunities others would kill for, and this is your gratitude. You've given me money I never asked for so you could hold it over my head," I replied, matching his quiet intensity. "You've used it to reinforce your narrative that I'm failing because I chose finance over medicine." "Well, the evidence speaks for itself, doesn't it?" he shot back. 28 years old and still needing mommy and daddy's help to make ends meet. It was at this moment that my father's control finally snapped. He slammed his hand down on the table hard enough to make the glasses jump. "Listen, Doug," he said, voice rising beyond what was appropriate for the setting. "We're not your bank anymore. We're done enabling this mediocrity. If you want to waste your potential, you'll do it without our financial support." The restaurant went silent. At nearby tables, conversations paused mid-sentence. Waiters froze in place, unsure whether to approach or retreat. Jessica closed her eyes briefly as if in pain. Ryan placed a supportive hand on her arm. In the ringing silence that followed my father's outburst, I felt a strange sense of calm descend. This moment, this public declaration, was actually liberating. They had finally said out loud what had been implicit for years. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Normally, I would never check messages during a family dinner, but in that frozen moment, I welcomed the distraction. I pulled out my phone and glanced at the screen. It was a text from Martin, my fund manager, Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, requesting approval for $20,000 monthly allowance from your family support fund. Standard protocol requires your authorization. Approve. I stared at the screen in disbelief as the pieces suddenly clicked into place. The text message glowed on my screen like a revelation. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, requesting approval for $20,000 monthly allowance from your family support fund. Standard protocol requires your authorization. Approve. Frame. Time seemed to slow as I processed what I was seeing. 3 years ago, after my first major investment success, I had established a special discretionary fund for family support. I had authorized my wealth management team to handle routine matters for this fund, helping Jessica with her wedding, covering my grandmother's medical expenses, but larger or recurring withdrawals required my direct approval. The fund was managed by Martin Keller, a discreet, competent professional who handled the family office services for my more substantial assets. He knew my parents, but had been explicitly instructed never to disclose my full financial situation to them. Somehow they had discovered the fund's existence but clearly misunderstood their relationship to it. I looked up from my phone to see my parents watching me with expressions of righteous indignation, completely unaware of the bombshell in my hand. "Something more important than this conversation, Doug?" my mother asked acidly. I held up one finger, asking for a moment, and typed my response to Martin. Denied. Will handle personally. Call you tomorrow. Who could possibly be texting you that takes priority over this family discussion? My father demanded. Actually, I said, calmly setting my phone face down on the table, it was Martin Keller, my fund manager. My father's brow furrowed in confusion. You're what? My fund manager, from Keller Partners, the private wealth management firm that handles my investment portfolio. My parents exchanged puzzled glances. Jessica bit her lip, sensing what was coming. Ryan suddenly became very interested in his water glass. What are you talking about? My mother asked. I'm talking about the text I just received informing me that you two have requested a $20,000 monthly allowance from my family support fund. The confusion on their faces shifted ever so slightly, first to surprise, then to something more guarded. There must be some mistake, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. No mistake. Martin was very specific. You contacted his office yesterday, identified yourselves as my parents, and requested access to monthly distributions from my family support fund. Since it was a substantial recurring request, it required my direct authorization. I kept my voice even controlled, which I just denied. My father's face, already flushed from our argument, darkened further. My mother's hand went to her throat in an instinctive gesture of distress. I don't understand, she said, though something in her eyes suggested she was beginning to. It's quite simple, really. Martin Keller works for me, not for you. The family support fund is my money, not yours. And I've just refused your request to access $20,000 monthly from my assets. A heavy silence fell over the table. In the background, the normal sounds of the restaurant, silverware clinking, muted conversations, waiters moving between tables, created a surreal soundtrack to the moment. This is absurd, my father finally said, but the bluster had drained from his voice. What kind of game are you playing? No game, Dad. Just the truth I've never shared because, frankly, you never seemed interested in hearing it. Jessica cleared her throat. Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. She was right, of course. The tables around us were trying very hard to appear disinterested while clearly hanging on every word. But I was beyond caring about appearances, something my parents had weaponized against me for years. Cumberland Investments is a boutique firm, as you've often pointed out, I said, ignoring Jessica's suggestion. What you don't know is that 4 years ago, I developed an investment strategy focusing on renewable energy and battery technology that has generated extraordinary returns. I now personally manage a fund worth over $300 million, with my own equity stake worth significantly more than that. My mother's mouth opened slightly, then closed without speaking. The certification program you mockingly referenced, that was actually a strategic investment in a startup that tripled in value. Those car repairs, an investment in a materials science company that's revolutionizing solar panel efficiency. Every dollar you loaned me has been invested and grown exponentially. I've kept track of every penny in what I call the Parents' Return Fund. The current balance would surprise you. My father's expression had transformed from anger to stunned disbelief. My mother was very still, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. That's not possible, she whispered. The modest apartment I maintain, it's one of 6 properties I own. I keep it specifically for family appearances. My primary residence is a penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor. The Honda One drive to these dinners. I keep it for the same reason. My actual vehicles would be too conspicuous. Ryan, who had some knowledge of my success through his real estate connections, nodded almost imperceptibly, confirming this wasn't some elaborate bluff. The irony, I continued feeling oddly detached as years of pent-up truth poured out, is that while you've been treating me as a financial failure, I've been quietly setting aside funds to ensure your retirement would be comfortable despite knowing you had mismanaged your own finances. At this, my father flinched visibly. It was a direct hit. They had indeed been experiencing financial difficulties due to overspending and poor investment choices, though they had hidden it well. How would you know about our finances? He demanded, a defensive edge creeping back into his voice. The same way you apparently found out about my family support fund. I make it my business to know. The difference is I was planning to help without humiliating you, without making you grovel for an allowance. My mother set down her wine glass with a shaking hand. Doug, if this is true. It is true. Every word. The Japan trip you mocked, it's for a business meeting with potential investors, followed by a well-earned vacation. The loans you've been tracking so meticulously. I've never needed $1 from you since graduation, but I accepted them to maintain the fiction you seemed so invested in, that I was struggling without your chosen career path. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. You knew about this, my mother asked her accusingly. Not the details, Jessica replied. But I knew Doug was doing well. Unlike some people, I actually listened when he talked about his work. My father the strategist was quickly recalibrating. I could see it in his eyes, the shift from indignation to calculation. Suddenly I wasn't an embarrassment. I was an opportunity. Well, he said with forced joviality, this is certainly a surprise. You should have told us, son. We would have been proud. Would you? I asked, simply. Because 10 minutes ago, before you knew about my success, I was an embarrassment, a disappointment, a failure who couldn't pay back his loans. We were concerned, my mother interjected smoothly. Parents worry. You've misinterpreted. I don't think I have, I interrupted. I think I've interpreted things exactly as they are for the first time in my life. The waiter approached cautiously, sensing the tension. Is everything all right with your meals? Everything's fine, my father said dismissively. Just a family discussion. Actually, I said, reaching for my wallet, I'm finished. I extracted several $100 bills, more than enough to cover the entire meal with a generous tip, and placed them on the table. That should cover dinner. Consider it the final installment in our financial relationship. My father's face darkened again. Don't be dramatic, Doug. Sit down. We can discuss this like adults. We had years to discuss this like adults, I replied, standing. You chose condescension instead. Doug, please, my mother said, her voice softening to the persuasive tone she likely used with reluctant witnesses. This is all a misunderstanding. We were only trying to help by contacting your fund manager. We didn't realize. You were trying to help yourselves to my money, I corrected her, while simultaneously berating me for financial irresponsibility. I turned to Jessica and Ryan. Would you like to continue this evening elsewhere? I'm suddenly in the mood for dessert someplace less judgmental. Jessica nodded, and stood Ryan following suit. I think that's a good idea. My father's face had transitioned from red to an alarming purple. You're making a scene, he hissed. No, Dad. For once, I'm just being honest. As the three of us prepared to leave, my mother made one last attempt. Doug, whatever issues we have, we can work them out. We're family. I paused, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Anger hurt, but also a strange sort of pity. Yes, we are family. And that should have meant supporting my choices, celebrating my successes, even the ones you didn't understand or approve of. Instead, you chose to diminish me at every turn because I didn't follow your prescribed path. That's not fair, my father protested. No, it wasn't fair. None of it was fair. But now we all know where we stand. I adjusted my jacket. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. For now, I need some distance. As we walked away, leaving my parents at the table with their expensive wine and cooling steaks, I heard whispers from nearby diners. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely. The charade was over. Outside in the cool Boston air, Jessica hugged me tightly. Well, she said as she pulled back, that was one for the family history books. Ryan clapped me on the shoulder. Want to tell us the whole story over ice cream? I think we've only scratched the surface. I smiled, feeling lighter despite the emotional weight of the confrontation. Ice cream sounds perfect, and yes, there's a lot more to tell. As we walked toward my sister's car, I glanced back at Morton's one last time. Through the window, I could see my parents' heads together in intense conversation, their expressions a mixture of shock, anger, and, most tellingly, calculation. They were already planning their next move. Let them plan, I thought. The power dynamic had shifted permanently, and we all knew it. Their laughter had indeed stopped instantly. The morning after the Mortons' confrontation, I woke to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. 15 calls were from my mother, 2 from my father. The texts ranged from my mother's increasingly frantic, Please call us to my father's more direct. This situation requires immediate discussion. Jessica had texted once. They've been calling me non-stop, holding firm on my end. Take your time. I made coffee in my Harbor View penthouse, the home my parents never knew existed, and watched the early morning light play on the water. For the first time in years, I felt no obligation to respond immediately to their demands. The relief was palpable, like setting down a heavy weight I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it was there. After our ice cream escape the night before, Jessica and Ryan had invited me back to their home in Brookline. Over late-night whiskey, I had filled in the gaps for them, the full extent of my financial success, the elaborate charade I had maintained, and the complex emotions behind it all. "I can't believe you kept this up for so long," Jessica had marveled. "Why not just tell them years ago?" The question had made me pause. At first, it was about proving myself on my own terms. Then, as their dismissiveness continued, despite my growing success, it became, "I don't know, a psychological experiment." How long could they maintain their fiction about me in the face of contrary evidence they weren't seeing because they weren't looking? Ryan had shaken his head in disbelief. "Man, they are going to be working overtime to rewrite this narrative." He wasn't wrong. By mid-morning, my mother had switched tactics from urgent pleas to a carefully worded email suggesting we had all overreacted in the heat of the moment and should clear the air as a family. My father predictably took a different approach. His email was shorter, more direct. "Your mother is distraught. Whatever issues exist between us causing her this pain is beneath you. Call immediately." The emotional manipulation was so transparent now that I had stepped outside their carefully constructed reality. Had it always been this obvious? Around noon, my phone rang with a call from Marcus Whitfield, my mentor from Cumberland. "Doug," he said when I answered, "interesting development this morning. Your father called me directly at the office." This was unexpected. "How did he even get your number?" "Apparently he's been doing some research. Wanted to discuss my professional relationship with his son. Seemed very interested in verifying certain details about your position and responsibilities. Let me guess. He was fishing for information about my finances." Marcus chuckled. "In the least subtle way possible. I kept things appropriately vague, of course. Client confidentiality and all that. But I thought you should know they're making inquiries. Thanks for the heads up, and for your discretion. Always. By the way, congratulations on the Benchmark acquisition. That was masterfully executed." After hanging up, I called Jessica to compare notes. "They showed up at our house this morning," she told me, sounding exhausted. "Mom was crying. Dad was demanding to know everything I knew about your supposed financial situation, as he put it. He still half thinks you were bluffing." "What did you tell them?" "That this was between you and them and I wasn't getting in the middle." "But Doug," she hesitated, "there's something else you should know." "What's that?" "They're in trouble. Financially. Worse than I realized. Mom let it slip when she was trying to explain why they contacted your fund manager. Apparently Dad made some bad investments, and they've been living beyond their means for years. The facade is cracking. This explained much of their recent behavior, but it didn't excuse it. Did they actually admit they were trying to access my money? Not in those words. They're spinning it as exploring family financial resources and ensuring everyone's needs are met. You know how they talk." I did know. Everything was always framed as concern, as parental responsibility, as looking out for my best interests, never as control or manipulation, or in this case, attempted financial exploitation. 3 days after the Mortons incident, I met with my attorney Diane Winters to discuss establishing clear financial boundaries. "They have no legal claim to your assets," she assured me, "but documenting everything is prudent. The loans they gave you, you kept records. Every dollar, every date, with notes about what was said at the time." "Good. And you said you've been tracking the growth of those investments separately." I nodded. "The Parents' Return Fund contains the original amounts plus all growth from investments made with that capital. It's grown to just over $300,000. Diane raised her eyebrows. "Impressive return. What do you want to do with it?" "I want to repay them the original amounts, around $20,000, and make it clear that concludes our financial relationship. The growth stays with me since I generated it through my investment expertise. And what about their financial troubles? Your sister mentioned they might be facing difficulties. I had been wrestling with this question since learning the extent of their problems. Despite everything, they were still my parents. I'll establish a trust, I decided, conservatively invested enough to ensure they maintain a comfortable lifestyle without extravagance, but with strict conditions and professional oversight. They won't have direct access to principal. That's generous considering the circumstances, Diane observed. It's not about generosity. It's about who I want to be versus who they tried to make me. A week after the confrontation, with no direct contact beyond those initial messages, my parents escalated their campaign. They began reaching out to mutual acquaintances, family, friends, even distant relatives, anyone who might have influence with me, sharing their version of events. In their telling, I had misunderstood their intentions, overreacted to parental concern, and was now cruelly cutting them off despite their years of support and sacrifice. The manipulation might have worked in the past, but now it only strengthened my resolve. Each flying monkey they dispatched received the same calm response. This is a private family matter that's being addressed appropriately. 10 days after Morton's, I finally agreed to a phone call, not with both parents together where they could tag team and control the narrative, but with my mother alone. "Doug, darling," she began, her voice carefully modulated to convey both warmth and hurt. "We've been so worried. This silence isn't like you. It's exactly like me, Mom. You just never noticed because I always responded to the pressure before. Pressure. We've only ever wanted what's best for you. What you thought was best for me. There's a difference." She sighed dramatically. "Your father and I may have been overzealous in our guidance. We can acknowledge that. But everything we did was from love, including trying to access my money behind my back while simultaneously criticizing me for financial irresponsibility." A pause. That was a misunderstanding. We were exploring options for family financial planning. If you had been open about your success, would it have changed how you treated me at all those dinners? The constant comparisons, the diminishment, the subtle digs. Another longer pause. "We're your parents, Doug. We've supported you your entire life." That's not an answer. The conversation continued in this vein, my mother alternating between justification deflection and appeals to family loyalty. At no point was there a genuine acknowledgement of the behavior that had led to this breach. "Your father wants to speak with you," she said finally. "Not yet. I need more time. He's not well, Doug. The stress of all this—" "Mom," I interrupted gently but firmly, "I'm going to hang up now. I'll be in touch soon about some financial arrangements I'm making. In the meantime, please respect my need for space." 2 weeks after the confrontation, I had my attorney deliver documents outlining the financial arrangements I had decided upon. The trust would provide them a comfortable monthly income without access to the principal. All previous loans were formally forgiven. A separate document made it clear I would not be providing any additional financial support outside these arrangements. The response came quickly. My father left a voicemail that started controlled but devolved into anger. "This trust is insulting. We are not children to be managed. After everything we've done for you, the sacrifices we've made, call me immediately to discuss dissolving this ridiculous arrangement." I didn't call. Instead, I sent a brief email. "The terms are non-negotiable. The trust provides security without enabling the financial mismanagement that has created your current situation. I'm happy to discuss rebuilding our relationship as a family, but our financial relationship is now strictly defined by these documents." His reply was a single line: "We raised you better than this." But they hadn't, not really. They had raised me to believe my worth was tied to following their prescribed path, to measuring success by their narrow definition, to seeking their approval above my own fulfillment. The person I had become, financially successful but more importantly ethically grounded, had developed largely in spite of those lessons, not because of them. A month after Morton's, Jessica called with an update. "They're starting to accept the new reality," she reported. "Dad's pride is still wounded, but the first trust distribution arrived, and I think the reliable income is a relief they won't admit. Are they still telling people I abandoned them in their time of need? The narrative is evolving, she said with a touch of dark humor. Now it's more Doug is going through something, but we're giving him space while he figures it out. They'll never admit they were wrong, but they're adapting. That's something, I suppose. It's progress. By the way, Ryan and I are having a small dinner party next weekend. Nothing fancy. Would you come? They won't be there, I promise. It was the first social invitation I had accepted since the confrontation. The evening was refreshingly normal. Good food, interesting conversation, no underlying tension or hidden agendas. For the first time in recent memory, I felt fully present, fully myself in a social setting involving family connections. 6 weeks after Morton's, I received an unexpected email from my father. The subject line was simply, "Acknowledgement." "Doug," it began, "this is difficult to write, but recent events have forced me to reconsider certain assumptions and behaviors. While I maintain that our intentions were good, I recognize that our approach may have been flawed. Your success achieved independently, and on your own terms, speaks for itself. I am attempting to understand why it was necessary for you to conceal it from us for so long. That reflection has been uncomfortable but necessary. The trust arrangements, while initially feeling like an affront, have provided stability during a challenging time. For that, I am grateful. When you are ready, I would appreciate the opportunity for a conversation. Not to defend past actions, but to establish a more honest foundation moving forward. Regardless of our differences, you are my son, and that counts for more than I have perhaps demonstrated recently. Dad." It wasn't an apology. Not really. But from my father, this level of self-reflection was unprecedented. It was a start. 6 months after the confrontation at Morton's Steakhouse, I found myself standing outside my parents' home in Brookline, feeling a complex mixture of resolve and apprehension. The sprawling colonial looked exactly as it had throughout my childhood, immaculately maintained, imposingly perfect from the outside. I wondered if the facade still matched the reality within. The past half-year had been transformative. With the weight of pretense lifted, I had restructured both my professional and personal lives around authenticity. I had moved my primary office from the Cumberland building to my own space in the financial district. I had begun speaking at investment conferences under my own name, no longer concerned about maintaining a low profile. I had even started mentoring young analysts who, like me, had unconventional approaches to the market. More significantly, I had begun working with Dr. Elaine Mercer, a therapist specializing in family dynamics and adult children of high-achieving parents. Our weekly sessions had helped me untangle the complex web of expectations, conditional love, and performance anxiety that had defined my relationship with my parents. The need for parental approval doesn't simply vanish because we intellectually recognize its toxicity, she had told me during a particularly insightful session. But we can learn to separate our self-worth from their assessment. Those words echoed in my mind as I rang the doorbell. This was the first time I would be seeing both parents together since that night at Morton's. My mother opened the door, her expression carefully neutral. "Doug," right on time. She stepped back to allow me in, offering her cheek for the customary kiss. I noticed she had lost weight, and there were new lines around her eyes. "How was Japan?" she asked, as she led me through the familiar hallway. "Productive and fascinating," I replied, surprised she had remembered. "The investment opportunities there are promising." The formality of our exchange felt strange after months of minimal contact, but it was better than the passive-aggressive tension that had characterized our interactions before. My father was waiting in the living room, standing rather than sitting, as though unsure of the proper protocol for this new reality. He looked older, somewhat diminished, without the armor of absolute certainty he had always worn. "Son," he said, extending his hand. We shook, a businesslike gesture that somehow contained more honesty than the performative hugs of the past. "Thanks for agreeing to meet here," I said, taking a seat on the sofa. "I thought familiar territory might make this easier. Your mother made your favorite beef Wellington. My father said an olive branch of sorts. Though I suppose your tastes may have changed." "Some things remain constant," I replied with a small smile. "I've always appreciated Mom's cooking." The initial awkwardness gradually eased as we moved to the dining room. The conversation remained carefully neutral through the first course. Current events, the unusually warm fall, Jessica's latest achievements at the hospital. No mentions of money, careers, or the trust that now governed their finances. It was during the main course that my father finally broached the subject. The monthly distributions have been helpful, he admitted, studying his plate. The financial advisor the trust connected us with has been straightforward about our situation. My mother nodded. She's helped us create a realistic budget for the first time in years. It's been educational. Coming from my parents, these oblique acknowledgments of financial mismanagement were equivalent to dramatic confessions from others. I'm glad it's working, I said simply. We've sold the vacation house in Cape Cod, my father continued, and I've reduced my practice to 3 days a week. Semi-retirement, they're calling it. I nodded, recognizing these changes for what they were. Necessary adjustments to a new financial reality, but also potential steps toward a healthier lifestyle. My father had always defined himself by his surgical practice, working, punishing hours, well beyond what was financially necessary. Perhaps this forced slowdown would allow him to develop other aspects of his identity. How is the foundation coming along? My mother asked, surprising me with her knowledge of my newest project. Jessica mentioned it, she explained, noting my expression. It sounds meaningful. The Mitchell Foundation for Financial Literacy was my attempt to translate personal experience into broader impact. We would provide education and resources to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them build financial independence through knowledge rather than handouts. It's in the early stages, but promising, I replied. We're partnering with community colleges and high schools in underserved areas. Your sister seems quite involved, my father observed. She's on the board. Her perspective is valuable. A beat of silence followed. We should have been prouder of you, Doug, my mother said suddenly, her voice softer than usual. Long before knowing about your financial success, we should have recognized your determination, your intelligence, your integrity. It wasn't a complete apology, but from Eleanor Mitchell it was unprecedented. I glanced at my father, who was staring intently at his wineglass. Your mother's right, he said finally. We measured success by a narrow standard. My standard. It was short-sighted. The acknowledgement hung in the air between us, not quite healing the breach but creating space for possibility. I hadn't come expecting transformation, just progress. This qualified. I appreciate that, I said carefully. I think we all have adjustments to make in how we relate to each other. After dinner, my father invited me to his study, previously a forbidden zone except when called in for serious discussions or reprimands. The room felt smaller than in my memories, the imposing bookshelves less intimidating. On his desk sat several financial statements and the quarterly report from the trust. I won't pretend this transition has been easy, he said, closing the door behind us. Pride is a stubborn companion, and I've had an abundance of it. I nodded, but remained silent, allowing him the space to continue. The trust. At first I saw it as punishment, control, but I've come to recognize it as something else. He paused, searching for words that didn't come naturally to Richard Mitchell, MD. Protection, structure, perhaps even care. That was the intent, I confirmed. He nodded, then reached into his desk drawer. I found this recently while organizing old papers. He handed me a yellowed newspaper clipping, a school paper feature on the investment club I had started junior year. The headline read, Mitchell leads investment club to regional championship. I kept it, he said simply. Even then, it was a small revelation but significant. Evidence that some part of him had registered my early successes even while outwardly dismissing them. We could have avoided much pain with better communication, he acknowledged. On both sides, I admitted. I chose concealment over confrontation. With good reason, perhaps. He looked up from the clipping. Your mother and I have discussed it at length. The monthly dinners, the constant comparisons, the pressure we applied. We thought we were motivating excellence. You were motivating performance anxiety and resentment, I said frankly. He winced, but nodded. A hard truth, one of many I've had to face recently. As I prepared to leave, my mother pressed a container of leftovers into my hands, a motherly gesture that felt both familiar and newly authentic. "We're learning, Doug," she said quietly. "Slowly, imperfectly, but learning." "That's all any of us can do," I replied. The reconciliation wasn't instant or complete. Trust, once broken, rebuilds gradually through consistent action rather than dramatic declarations. But that evening marked a turning point, the first honest exchange we'd had in perhaps our entire relationship. Over the following months, we established new patterns of interaction. Monthly dinners resumed, but in a rotation of locations, sometimes at Jessica's, occasionally at restaurants, once even at my penthouse, which my parents entered with poorly concealed shock at its elegance and views. The dynamics shifted subtly but significantly. My father began asking genuine questions about my investment strategies, listening with respect rather than skepticism. My mother stopped offering unsolicited advice and started sharing more of her own uncertainties and challenges. During the winter holidays, a moment crystallized the change. At Jessica's home, surrounded by family, my father raised a toast. "To Doug," he said, his voice steady, but emotion evident in his eyes, "whose success has been earned through vision, determination, and courage, including the courage to chart his own course. When others, he paused when I couldn't see its merit. I'm proud to be your father." The words I had longed to hear for decades. They came not in response to my conforming to his expectations, but in recognition of my having defied them successfully. Later that evening, my mother found me alone in the kitchen. "I owe you a proper apology," she said without preamble. "Not just for the recent unpleasantness, but for years of conditional support." "Mom, please let me finish. I've rehearsed this." She smiled briefly. "As a lawyer, I should know that intent doesn't negate impact. We intended to push you towards success, but we made you feel inadequate instead. That was wrong, and I am truly sorry." The simple, direct acknowledgement meant more than any elaborate explanation could have. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." Spring brought a new development. After consultation with my financial and legal teams, I established the Mitchell Family Foundation, separate from my financial literacy initiative, focused specifically on creating structure for family financial support with clear boundaries and purpose. "This isn't about control," I explained at the formal dinner where I presented the concept. "It's about legacy planning that benefits everyone while maintaining appropriate boundaries." My parents, Jessica and Ryan, and several extended family members listened as I outlined the foundation's principles: support for education, healthcare, entrepreneurship, and quality of life, but with clear criteria and professional oversight. No direct access to principal, no arbitrary withdrawals, no financial relationships that could damage personal ones. "I've learned that money without boundaries destroys relationships," I explained. "This foundation creates a framework that allows for support without enabling dependence or breeding resentment." My father, who once would have rejected any financial structure he didn't control, nodded thoughtfully. "Wisdom often comes from difficult experience," he observed. "You've turned yours into something constructive." The journey from confrontation to reconciliation taught me lessons I now share with others through my foundation work and mentoring. True wealth isn't measured by account balances, but by the authenticity of our relationships and the integrity of our choices. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're essential protection for all parties in any relationship, especially those involving financial dynamics. Validation from others feels hollow if it's based on false premises. Real satisfaction comes from being recognized for who you truly are. Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. It's possible to move forward with clear eyes about the past while choosing not to be defined by it. Family systems can change, but rarely through dramatic confrontations alone. Sustainable transformation requires consistent reinforcement of new patterns. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that standing in your truth, however uncomfortable initially, creates the only foundation on which genuine relationships can be built. 6 months after that confrontation at Morton's, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have predicted. The facade had crumbled, But what emerged was more solid, more authentic, and ultimately more rewarding than the elaborate charade I had maintained for years. The most valuable currency isn't money, it's truth. And that's a wealth no one can take from you once you claim it. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to family expectations that didn't align with your authentic self? Have you experienced the freedom that comes with finally dropping a facade you maintained for others' comfort? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you want to hear more stories about finding your authentic path. Thanks for listening. And remember, your worth isn't determined by others' expectations. It's revealed when you have the courage to be genuinely yourself.